Good morning, everybody. How are we all doing today? Good. I'm doing excellent as well. I had to restart the demo server for this workshop about 45 minutes ago, and spent 5 minutes just completely freaking out until it came back up. So now I'm good. It's back up. Everything's cool. So welcome. If you're in this room, hopefully you're here for the Jamf Pro API workshop part 1. There is a part 2 directly after this. It's not the same session over again. I don't know why they didn't put part 2 in the description for that one, but it is part 1 and part 2. I am Kitzy, for those of you who don't know me. I'll be leading the session, and my good buddy Bryson from Jamf is also here to help answer any API questions if anyone gets really stuck on something, so we don't derail the whole session. So thank you, Bryson, for hanging out, drinking some coffee. So before we get started, there's a few resources that I'd like you all to check out. This GitHub link has copies of all of the code that we're going to be looking at today, so you don't have to worry about copying it off of my slides. It also has a copy of the slides, should you want that, as well as some resources for accessing the demo server and whatnot. So I'll give everyone a minute to hit that URL and get what you need. Does anybody still need that URL on the screen? Yes? Okay. It's in Slack now? Excellent. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on then. If you don't have it, it's in Slack, I'm told. In the channel that I posted here or somewhere else?
In the channel you posted.
Perfect. So, very important note. Do not use your production Jamf Pro server for this workshop. I'm going to say that again. Do not use your production Jamf Pro server for this workshop. And just to show you I'm really serious, I'm going to say it a third time. Do not use your production Jamf Pro server for this workshop. We are going to be working with code that makes changes and deletes things, so don't do that. If you do that, I am not responsible for anything that happens. So we do have in that GitHub repo I had you all download, there is a README file with a URL and a username and password for the demo server that we can all use. You are free to use that as you wish. Please don't completely break it, because that would suck for everybody, including me. So we are going to get started unless anyone has any questions about getting that repo or whether or not they can use their production Jamf Pro server for this workshop. Yes? So the link? It's in the Slack channel, and it's right there.
The room channel. You told 1 or 2? 2.
All right, is anybody else having trouble getting the link, or are we all good? Okay, I'm going to assume we're all good. Again, don't use your production Jamf Pro server. Okay, so The first thing we want to look at when working with the Jamf Pro API is actually there's a interactive GUI for the API which you can find at any JSS URL/API. So we're going to do a quick demo of how that works and the things that you can do with it. So let's see if I can make that a little bigger. Everybody read that? Is that good? Good? Cool. So this is the API on that demo server. And as you can see here, it shows us all of the endpoints that are possible to hit. So really when you're looking for documentation, this is usually where I start, because this just shows me exactly what I can and can't do. So we're going to take a look first at computers. And if I click that, I then get a full list here of all the different things I can do with computers. You can see here on the left side we have some different request types like get, put, post, and delete. We're going to talk more about those later. And then here you can see the different ways we can use this endpoint to get data. So the first one we're going to look at here is just this computers endpoint with no additional information. And if we hit this try it out button, you can see we just get this long list of every computer. And it gives you the name and the ID and not much else. Has everyone been able to hit that on the demo server? Cool. So you also see that it gives you two different response bodies. You have XML and JSON. You can actually specify in your requests which one that you get, depending on what you're trying to do, and we'll talk more about that later as well. Another note here, just real quick, there is, you'll see there's a lot of dummy data in this Jamf Pro server. That was actually automatically populated by a script that Bryson wrote, and the link to that is in the README in that repository. So if you're looking to spin up a demo server with some dummy data, that's a really quick way to do it. So thank you, Bryson, for that awesome tool. So another thing we can do if we want to get a little more granular here is we can pick an ID number of one of these computers. And we can go in here into the computers by ID section and try it out. And now, if you can read that, that looks pretty similar to, oh, that's the wrong button. A lot of this is going to be mirror basically what you see in your Jamf Pro inventory for a computer, but it's going to be in XML or JSON instead. So, for example, if we go down here to, let's say, hardware, so we have this hardware tag here, and then we can see the make, the model identifier, everything you can see in inventory. So basically, if you see it in inventory, you should be able to get it through the API with a few exceptions. But for the most part, you'll be able to pull it from the API. So this is a really good resource when you're writing your API calls, because I often forget what the path for something I'm looking for is or what the data structure looks like. So this is a really great way to quickly see what the data structure looks like so you can find what you're looking for much easier. So that's not the right one. There we go. But using it through the GUI doesn't really help us because we could just go into Jamf regularly and do it that way. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how to interact with this using the command line tool curl. Is anyone in here never used curl before or not familiar with it at all? A couple people? Okay, that's all right. We're going to learn about it today. So the first thing about curl is it has 4 different request types, and we saw that earlier in the left side of the GUI there. There's get, which is basically read data. There is put, which is an update to data. So that's like updating an existing record that's already there. There's a post, which is creating new data, so creating a new record or a new object, and then delete should be pretty self-explanatory, deletes the record. So this kind of shows you how these request types correspond to the actions in the Jamf Pro permission set. So that's pretty much a one-to-one relationship there. There's also a few flags that we're going to be using with curl as well. For this part one, we're going to be using the three that you see here, the -u or --user, which allows you to pass the username and password for authentication. There's the -s or --silent. This basically suppresses all of the output from curl except for the piece of data that you're looking for. This is really helpful when you're processing the data and doing string manipulation and stuff like that, so that you don't get like a progress bar included in your variable. You just get the result you're looking for. So you can play around with using that and not using that and see kind of what the differences are and what you get. And then there's the -H or -- header, which allows you to include an extra header in the request. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here. So there's a few different ways to request and put data in. The two most popular being XML and JSON. You have to specify in your header which one you want. Otherwise, when getting data, it usually gives you XML, but sometimes will give you JSON, so it's a good idea to specify it all the time. And when you are putting or posting data, you have to tell it what you're giving it. And note that when you're doing a get, the header starts with accept, and when you're doing a put or post, it starts with content-type. In that repo, there is a curl reference that has all of these flags and headers and things as well. So if you don't want to copy all this down, it's all in that repo. So let's take that and we're going to make a request. Just a quick note on these should all be one line, but if I made them one line, the text would be approximately this big and you wouldn't be able to read it. So just pretend it's all on one line. So we start with our curl command, and that's just telling us, telling the computer what command we want to use. And then we have our -su. So if you remember, the S is for silent, and the U is for user. And then we specify our username and password in the form of username:password. So here I have it set in variables. You could also hard code it into your command if you like, but I'll be using variables for the remainder of this presentation. Here you can see how we're using the -H for the headers. We're telling the API that we will only accept our response in the form of XML. We don't want JSON. And then finally, we give it the URL that we're using, followed by the endpoint for the API. So one thing you'll note is that it's always going to be Jamf Pro URL /JSS resource / whatever thing you're trying to get. So I often forget that JSS resource in there, and that trips me up a lot, so just try to remember that. Yes?
/API/JSS resource?
So the question was, is that /API/JSS resource? And the answer is no. It's just the URL /JSS resource. You only use the /API when you are going in a web browser to look at it. So that's what a basic request looks like, and now we're going to look at a demo of that. So in that repository that I gave you, you'll actually have, can everyone read that? Is that okay? Do I need to make it bigger? It's good? Okay, cool. So this is that same command. This will be in section 1, the section 1 folder called Get All Computers. This is that same command that we just saw on the screen, but we now have variables to populate, so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to put in my username of Jamf and my super secure password of Jamf. And so now what happens if I run this, for those of you who may not be familiar with bash scripting, is it's going to take these variables that I defined here, and it's going to populate them where I have them listed here in the command. So it's basically the equivalent of typing them into the command. So I'm going to run that. And as you can see, I got a lot of data back. It's not very pretty. It's very jumbled together, but it is the data that I'm looking for. So you can see here we have this opening computers tag, and then we have this size tag, which tells us how many records it's returned. That can be very helpful. And then we start here with computer singular. Come on, highlight that. There we go. And you can see it gives me the ID and the name of the computer, but nothing else. So is everybody able to try that on their own? I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And again, all this code is in that repo if you don't want to type it out manually. But you are, of course, welcome to type it manually if that's how you learn. Was anybody not able to get that to work? Cool. So let's see what we can do with this stuff. So as you saw, the output of that was not very readable. It was kind of a jumbled mess. No one wants to try to sift through that. So if you're looking for readable output, you can make it pretty with a command called XML Lint -- format. And basically what this does is it's going to format the XML into a line-by-line indented section of data, just like we'd expect a normal XML document to be, which makes it much more readable. So here's what a command looks like we're using XML Lint. And you'll notice the command is really the same thing with the exception of this end bit. So we are piping this command to XML Lint. And if anyone's not familiar with bash scripting, piping is basically taking the output of one command and then the pipe sends it to a second command. So what we're doing here is we're requesting the mobile device of ID 1 from the Jamf Pro server, and then we're parsing that through XML Lint format, and then the dash on the end just means read the output of standard out. XML format by default expects a file, so you have to put this dash on there in order to tell it to just read the output that the last command gave it. So let's look at a demo of how that works. So here again, you can see the same command we just had on the screen. Nope. Yeah. Probably should have filled all this in before I did this, huh? And so if I run this, now you can see down here at the bottom that I got a much more readable response. And this looks just like what we saw in the Jamf Pro GUI. You can also play with this a little bit if you want. For example, you can change this ID number to something else, and you'll get a different result. Let's see here, we got the ID number 100. You can also change this to computers and spell it correctly. And this will give you the response of the computer with ID 100. So I'll give you all a few minutes to play with that and see what you can find with it. And if anyone's having trouble getting that working, just let me know. Is there a way we can get the timer in the back turned on? Because I have no idea how much time I have left.
Is the GET request type implied for this?
Oh, this is a great question. So for the recording, the question was, is the GET request implied for this? And yes. Anytime you don't specify a request type, then curl just assumes you want to GET. So thank you for that. I meant to mention that earlier and forgot, so that's perfect. And thank you for the timer, I appreciate that. Does anybody need more time to play with this command or have any trouble with it? You have a question? Can't get it to run. Bryson, do you mind taking a look? Yes.
After the dash format, what's that additional hyphen for? Like, what's it doing there?
Okay, cool. So the question was after the dash format, what the additional hyphen is for. So XML Lint by default is expecting a file path to read from. And since we're just kind of handling this all within the command, the dash on the end tells it to read from standard output instead of from a file. So basically it's just saying like, hey, take whatever just came out of the last command and use that instead of a file. So you'll find pretty quick if you don't include that this whole thing falls apart and it doesn't work. All good? Cool, thank you. All right, unless anyone has any more questions about this particular part of the workshop, I think we'll move on. Cool. So, too far. Okay. So, getting that whole big list of data, the entire inventory record of a computer or mobile device, not always what we want. Sometimes we're just looking for one specific piece of data. And there's actually a pretty easy way to get that, also using XPath. This description's kind of hard to understand if you don't really know what's going on, so we're just going to skip over that, and I'm just going to show you how this works. So this is what a command looks like using XPath with XML Lint. Really the first half of the command before the pipe is exactly the same as we've been using so far, but this time with XML Lint we're passing a --XPath. And then here's where we tell it what to look for. So we've got a /mobile_device/general/serial_number. So that's going to be the XML structure, and I'll show you that in a second. And then /text with the parentheses, which is basically a function that says, give me the text that you find in this location. And then once again, we have the dash for read from standard output from the last command. And so we'll take a look at this demo here, and this will be, this will be number 3. We're going to get the serial number here. So, once again, here's our XML Lint XPath. Man, I'm bad at clicking today. There we go. and then we're looking for mobile device general serial number. And so if I run that, hey, oh, I forgot to fill in my stuff. I'm just going to put that URL on my clipboard because I'm going to be typing it a lot today. There we go. So you can see that returns just the serial number. Now, just to show you what I was talking about with this silent switch, if I take that out, that's what I get. So if you're putting this in a script and you're trying to get the serial number stored in a variable, you definitely want to use that silent switch. Otherwise, your variables would include all of the output that you see there, and that's not typically what you want. So with that silent switch, we just get the serial number. So the question here is, well, how do I know what this path is? How do I know where to get the data that I want? And so that's where we come back up here to our nifty little API documentation. And we're going to go into mobile devices. That's what we've been looking at. And we'll look at mobile device of ID 1. And we'll look at this XML response body. Now, you could also do an API call to get the same thing like we did in the last exercise, where it just gives you the whole thing of XML. But I find this is often a lot faster than writing that call if you're just trying to figure out what the data structure looks like. So we know everything here is under mobile device. So we know that's going to be the first part. And then I have to find the serial number. And I've found that here. So we know that serial underscore number is the tag that we're looking for. And then we just have to trace our way back up through the XML. So I can see that this serial underscore number is under general, which is under mobile device. And so you'll see here, that's what we have there, mobile device, general, serial underscore number. Does it all make sense? Did we all look at that? Cool. And so, of course, you can change to a different number, ID number, and get a different serial number. You could also, if you wanted to, pull from computers instead. Now, here's the thing. We changed the computer's endpoint, but we're still looking at the mobile device XPath tag, so we have to change that as well. And I believe that's going to be correct. There we go. So that code is in the section 1 folder, number 3, get serial number.sh. I'll give you all a few minutes to play with that and try that out if you haven't already. And as always, if you have questions or issues, just let me know. Yes?
Looking through the URL to find the path for the actual XML, and I think you might have mentioned you said general wasn't listed under the tree. Is that just default?
So you're asking is general the default in the tree? Not necessarily. So if we look at this tree, we have mobile device in general, and we have a lot of information under there. But then you'll notice we close the general tag, and we move on to the location tag. So you can't really assume that general is always going to be where the information that you want is. You're welcome. For the most part, these are going to mirror what you see if you actually log in and you look at an inventory record. So you'll see here we've got, general, hardware, user and location. So those different XML sections are, for the most part, going to mirror what you see in these sections. So typically, if you know that the thing that you're looking for is in, user and location, then if we come over here, we want to find the location section, and that's probably where that data is. All right, has everyone been able to get that to work for them? Okay, cool. So for our next exercise, we are going to find a computer by serial number. So what this is doing is it's taking the serial number of the computer that we run the code on and doing a Jamf API call to actually find the serial number. So there's a lot going on there. Let's break this down. So the first thing that we're doing is we're setting a variable called serial number. And what we're doing here is with this $ and the parentheses, we are saying the output of the command within these parentheses is what we want to set to the serial number variable. And then we're using the system profiler or system underscore profiler command to get the serial number. And then we're piping that to awk to search for the line that has serial and printing the fourth column in that line. So don't worry too much about that because that's kind of just auxiliary to what we're actually working on here. Just trust me that that works and that's how you get a serial number. So next thing that we're doing is we are setting a new variable of Jamf ID, and again with the $ and the parentheses, we are saying everything in this command is what I like. The result of this command is what I want to set to my variable. So you'll see from before we're using the curl-su and supplying our username and password for authentication. We're telling it again that we want XML as the response because that's what we're trying to parse. And then here we are using the Jamf Pro URL and using the computer's endpoint, but instead of ID this time we're looking by serial number, which is the thing that you can do. And oops. And then notice here that instead of specifying the serial number, we're using another variable. We're using that serial number variable that we set before. So what we've done here is we've set a variable, populated it with some code that got the result that we wanted, and then we use that variable in our next command in order to get the result that we wanted. And then finally, just like before, we're passing this to XML Lint with an XPath. And we're doing that to get, instead of the serial this time, we're doing it to get the ID. So we're doing computer general ID. And then finally, we're just using the echo command to echo out that variable. In this instance, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. We could have just kind of left out the Jamf ID variable and just run this curl command, but I just kind of wanted to show you how you would take the result of a API call and store it in a variable, because that's usually what you end up doing when you work with the API. So let's see that in action. Now I will, ooh, that's too many shebangs. I will warn you that this particular code, unmodified, will not work on your machine because your machine is not enrolled in the demo Jamf server. You're free to enroll it if you want, but I'm guessing it's your production machine that you don't want to unmanage, so I wouldn't. But if you want to play with this, you can use one of the serial numbers we got in the last exercise and just kind of replace this command with one of those serial numbers. So I'll show you what this looks like. So that tells me that my computer is number 261. And it did that by getting my serial number and then asking the Jamf API for my serial number. So if we go back here, I'm going to grab the serial number that I got in the last one, and I'm just going to delete this and just give it a serial number instead. And so that's how you all can do this if you want to try it. And so you'll see that this gives me back that it's computer number 78. So I'll give you all a few minutes to play with that. Was anybody not able to get that work, or just a little confused about what's going on here? I know we kind of took a big jump to this multiple command stuff. All right, I'm going to take that as everyone is good. So now I have a challenge for all of you. I want you to take what we've learned, and I want you to write a script that outputs the computer model, the serial number, and the assigned user of whatever computer ID you give it. And if you want bonus points, do it with a single API call. There is a solution in the solutions folder for this that shows you both how to do it using an API call for each piece of data that you want, and then using a single API call. But I would encourage you to try it on your own before you look at that solution. But if you get super stuck, that's there. And I'll give you all some time to try and work that solution out. If you get stuck, if you have questions, just raise your hand. Bryce and I are here to help you out. Do you want to take the challenge?
Can I write in Python?
You can, yes.
Where? Oh, do I not have Python installed on this thing? Oh my god. Failure. Alright. MacBook comes out, have to do real work now.
So if those of you who may not have heard, Bryson is attempting the challenge in Python versus Bash, which you definitely don't need to use Bash to work with the Jamf API. Python is actually probably a better way to do it in the long run, but I find Python can be a little intimidating for people who've never used it before, whereas Bash seems a little more straightforward. So that's why we're mostly working with Bash in this workshop, because this is, after all, a getting started workshop, not an advanced Bryson scripting workshop.
Going for that popular script would actually be kind of fun. Which, by the way, I totally ripped that whole thing off of somebody internally who wrote it in Bash originally. I just looked at your username and password.
So how's everybody coming along? Is anybody stuck? Cool, cool. This part is going to be fantastic for YouTube. Just like minutes of nothing, just me standing here looking around.
You should ask them to actually edit in elevator music during this time. Maybe a little Jeopardy.
I was actually going to ask them just to edit these parts out. Hopefully that's a thing that we can do. Otherwise, it's going to be very boring to watch. Sorry, do you have a question? What was? Oh. So the question was, we're specifying which computer we want by the Jamf ID, and that is correct, yes. Unless you really want to do it a different way.
Like MAC address.
If you really want to do it by MAC address, you can. All I care about is that you have a script that outputs me a computer model, serial number, and assigned user. However you want to do that, as long as that data is all coming from the API, I'm happy.
So model, serial number, and user?
Yeah, assigned user. And for assigned user, you can use username or full name or email address. I don't really care what you use to identify that user as long as it's one of those things. All right, does anyone have a working solution yet? Do you want to share it?
It's the 3 API calls, but yeah, I can share.
Do you want to come up and share it? Is that okay? Do you mind?
Sure. Copy paste.
And then if you can just talk into this so everyone can hear you.
Yeah.
Do you need to adjust mirroring settings maybe?
Picking it up.
Not detecting it?
Strange.
Hmm.
Not that it should make a difference, but I can try. The other side. Gotta love technology. Interesting.
Well, that's fun.
I can put it in Slack.
Okay, yeah. Put in Slack. I'll pull it up on mine.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
Jamf API. No. Yeah, code text snippet.
Let's see. Oh, do I have Slack on this?
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Am I signed in is the real question. Oh, no.
Technical difficulties.
Oh, geez. I don't have my password manager on here for sure. Please be easy. Okay, cool.
Should be in
Cool. Oh, that's not the right one.
ESU
There it is.
Jamf API, yeah. And then the snippet, yeah.
Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is just going to download this.
Okay.
And there you go. Go ahead and talk us through that.
All right, so basically what I did is copy pasted the URL, username and password from the previous examples that we've used. Same information at the top there. And then after that, using one of the known good examples, again, just kind of copied and pasted and modified. So first, computer model, that was pretty, copied it over from one, like Get All Computers or one of the other ones we've done, and then modified as needed. Mobile devices ID, in this case, I hard-coded the ID 173, just random number. And then from the website that we had shown earlier, I think you still had it up over here. I basically went through, as we were shown earlier, to figure out where to go for exactly where to get the username and also where to get the serial number from the same location. So if we run this in shell script, you'll see it's an iPad 3rd generation cellular. Serial number is there, and Eric Pollitt, I guess, is the real name. There is, at first I realized that if you do username instead of real name, which I found just on that website, it says their actual login user ID, Eric.Pollitt, instead of Eric space Pollitt, the proper name that you would use for a real person. So depending on what you need, that might work. Whoops. Depending on your scripting needs. And again, that just came straight out of here. Username and real name, in this example for a different computer number, in this case ID number 1, is really where you can get it from. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you. Has anyone gotten a single API call solution? You have? Do you want to share it? Yeah, why don't you do that, because the changing thing seems to not work great.
Make sure you use 3 backticks for our first line, then paste your code, and then 3 more backticks. That will make it that gray pre-formatted box of text. And the Python solution has been posted. A Python solution. There are many solutions.
Python's always the solution, right?
Well, if you want to get like philosophical.
I always have 2 shebangs, don't I? Do you want to come up and talk through it?
Okay, so I'm doing the same call as before, except in the line 7, I'm storing the single call of all the computer output for computer ID, number 100. That's all being stored as a variable. And then I use 3 separate calls to go through that variable to then XML out the 3 pieces that I want.
Nice.
So,
Can we see it work?
So form of user.
Cool. Yes.
So why are the paths different from the first person who showed the paths, and he has different paths to get those information?
I believe the first one was looking at mobile devices instead of computers. Yeah. Which is fine. Either one is good. Has anyone else done one of the solutions in a different way that might want to share what they've done? Bryson, do you want to share your Python example?
It's posted in the Slack channel.
Do you want to talk us through it?
So,
Well, here, let's.
and for the record, it's a Python 3 example.
This was yours, yeah?
Yeah. You have Python 3 in requests.
We're going to find out. No.
So while Kitzy's doing that, super basic example. Requests.
You know, I'm just going to trust you that it works.
Just do your thing. Request is an HTTP library for Python. Probably one of the best HTTP libraries that's ever been created, and people who
Bryson.
don't use Python say that. Hi. So, I should probably repeat that, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is a Python 3 example because I'm using a fun function called fstrings, but requests is an HTTP library that you install separately from Python. It's one of the best HTTP libraries out there, and people who don't use Python often say that too. Lots of libraries actually mimic its interface because it did it really well. As you can see, it does a really simple syntax. You know, it's really easy to get into. You import the library, you can call it with dot notation like most other Python objects. We're not going to get into the nuances of Python here, but request.get, so those HTTP actions that Kitzy was talking about earlier, you know, same interface. The URL that I want to get, I then, for the auth, pass in the username and the password. That's super secure username and password. And then I'm passing in the headers where I give it key value pairs for all the headers. And in this case, I'm only passing in one saying I want JSON back. And then after all of that, that .json is a method that's in there that actually tells it, after you're done getting this request, just immediately give me back a Python dictionary. And so so then to make things just a little bit shorter for me, I'm then taking so the XML looks a lot like, the JSON looks a lot like the XML, where there's going to be a top-level computer key and then all the stuff in it. So I'm just simplifying things by putting that into a variable, so it's a little less typing for me. And then I print out each of those things on one line where I'm actually just doing it's kind of like the same pathing that you're doing in Bash using XML Lint and XPath, except I'm just calling the keys for each object level. So for the top one there, in computer, there's going to be a key for hardware that contains all those. So brackets, quotation marks, hardware, and then under that I want the model. So calling brackets, quotes, model will return the value that's in there for me. And that's just going to print it out nicely, kind of like how I showed you in the Slack channel.
What's the, how do I install the requests library?
Pip. Yeah, pip.
It's just pip install requests?
Yep. Like, is that System Python or Python 3?
Python 3.
Okay.
Pip not found. What am I doing wrong here?
Pip 3 install requests.
There we go.
Ah, beautiful.
Cool. Okay, now let's see your code in action.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
It works on my machine.
Hey, there we go. I like that you preface them with the model, the tags, so we know what we're looking at. It's nice. All right, so we have, looks like 19 minutes left in this part one session. I'm going to use that time to answer any questions you may have about what we've done so far, or anything that you're not quite clear on. So does anyone have a question? So I just taught this like super well then, or okay, Bryson, you mind with the? See if I can get that all the way to you.
Hold drinks.
Oh, everybody okay?
Do you actually have an example of how to do that with one line in Bash? Or with one?
Do I have an example? Yes, I do. It is in the solutions folder if you want to take a look at it yourself. Under challenge 1 bonus. I'm doing something very similar to the example that was shared, except instead of storing the output of a computer's full inventory record in a variable, I'm just storing it in a file in temp. And I'm doing that by using this -o flag, which is for output, so piping the output there, or not piping, but sending the output to temp computer.xml. And then for my XML Lint command, where we used to have the dash at the end telling it to read from standard output, I'm just giving it the file name. So we're just reading from the file, and then here at the end, I'm just cleaning up after myself. So that's in the solutions folder if you want to play with that. Any other questions, comments? On the catch box.
So this is more of a sort of a general question. There's a couple ways that I've seen to get the serial number. Is there any reason to use one over another? Because the one I've been using lately, because it was a little shorter, was using the IO reg, which I found in someone else's script, and it was like minutely faster. But I don't know if there's actually any reason for it.
That is the reason.
Yeah, really speed is the reason. Some commands are faster than others. I don't know. That's the one I've just been using forever, so that's what I stick with because it's the one I remember. But really, ultimately, the way I look at it is as long as you're getting the data that you want, you're not doing anything wrong. But, like you found like some are faster than others. I know there's one that's like painfully slow, which I think is actually... there we go. Yeah, I think if you do system profiler without specifying the hardware data type, I think that'll take like probably the rest of the time that we have here. So that'll be a good way to eat things up. If you do this, I've definitely seen this done before. Leave that out, and that just takes ages. So don't do that, maybe, but.
All right. Just a comment to add on that. Situations where you want to be more cognizant of how much time things like that are taking is when you're doing a lot of extension attributes. The more extension attributes you do, and the longer the commands of them take, the longer you stretch out that recon time that's running on the machine. So you might
this isn't even working.
Like if you're doing a whole bunch of extension attributes that are pulling system information in order to do things, you might want to switch to something like IOReg in order to do it way faster. So that way you shorten each extension attribute's runtime, so that way you condense down that total recon time. I think I've heard stories about certain customers where the admin found that developers were watching processes, and when that Jamf process was taking too long, they were going out and terminating it because it was eating up too many valuable resources on their machine. Not that they had anything better to do at the time.
I've definitely encountered that at my organization too, where we had an extension attribute where the code was old, was a very old extension attribute, and it was not running well on 10.14, and so it was just basically just hanging forever. And one of our developers pointed like, hey, why is this process hanging on my machine all the time? So.
And that's another thing. If it hangs forever, then you're not getting a recon. So.
Yeah. This would eventually fail and then, move on, but still, it wasn't good. But we fixed it. Now it's fine. Yes.
Oh. All right.
Nice.
Yeah, well, riffing on that, is there any good way to sort of get recon to run in a verbose mode so you can see, watch it run your various extension attributes so you can try and troubleshoot that?
Yes, there is. It's -verbose on the end of your recon command.
Oh, well, that's easy.
Very easy.
A little too easy.
Almost, yeah. But -v does not work, so don't fall into that trap like I do all the time.
So in our environment, we have to do dev, staging, and prod as mandated by our management. Can we use the API calls to export and import policies and profiles?
You absolutely can, and there's a really cool tool already to do that I think Bryson can probably talk a little bit more about than I can.
I prototyped one, and then Pro Services wrote another one.
Do you want to use that catch box so that it gets on the recording?
Yeah, I prototyped something like that called Promoter. It's out there. Don't use it because it was a prototype for the 9 series. But Pro Services, if you go crawling through the Jamf GitHub, there is a utility for doing things like that they were working on.
Is it just under Jamf or?
No,
Jamf
we
PS?
consolidated all of them. We killed all the other GitHub accounts.
I think it's this one, right?
What's it called?
Jamf Migrator?
Yes, I believe that.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, this thing.
Yeah, so you could certainly write your own scripting or coding to do that, but this exists. And I would probably start with that and see if it meets your needs before reinventing the wheel.
Plus, if something doesn't work with it, you can go yell at the PSEs. You heard it from me first.
Yeah, this is a real time saver. We do the same thing. We have a staging and a prod, and this definitely helps. I guess I can drop this link in the Slack, huh? Do we have any other questions? All the way in the back. That was a good throw.
I almost took out the camera person.
Do you recommend for different tasks having particular API accounts with limited permissions?
Yes.
Like, would you use an account per task and limit the permissions like that, or just have an API account and expand it as you need it?
Yeah, for the most part, I would do a single account per problem that you're trying to solve. So, if you have a particular API script that is updating, let's say, changing the site on a computer, and then you have a different API script that's doing a completely different thing, like migrating policies, I would do 2 different accounts. And I would what we do internally is we name them with API in all caps _ and then just a description of what that account is doing, so that when we look at the logs, we can see easily the API _ computer site migrator made this call. So that's an easy way for us to figure out what account is doing what by looking at the logs. So I would, I definitely would recommend operating from a least privileged position with those accounts, because if you make a mistake in the code and it has too many permissions, sometimes things can go horribly wrong, and that's not a good time for anybody.
For automation.
What's that?
For automation, you wouldn't create service users for just running tools.
Oh, yeah, okay. So Bryson pointed out that that's for automation, but for just running tools like, like this Jamf migrator or something like that, I would probably just use my own account. But yeah, if you're doing things with automation, then yeah, for sure use different accounts for each task.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So if there are no more questions, I think we can go ahead and officially wrap part 1. I will just be hanging out in here if you do have questions or want me to look at something that you get stuck on. But yeah, thank you all for coming. I hope to see you all in session 2, which starts at a time, I think 10:45, is that right? Yeah, 10:45. So we'll be starting part 2 at 10:45. We'll be doing a little bit more advanced stuff with some writing data and updating data and deleting data, so don't miss that. That'll be fun. So thank you all.